Hi everyone. So the first media I did a response to was The Heart of Dixie. It was really interesting to watch and analyze this because I've never saw or heard of the show, which wasn't the case with most of the other ones that we've talked about. I've at least kind of known about them and what the show's about. Although from only watching one episode, it was really hard to dive into Lemon and Levon's relationship. While I was watching it, I didn't see any underlying racism from just this particular episode. I think Lemon would act the same way towards any man she was cheating on her fiance with, no matter what race he was. And I think that seemed to be the consensus with the people who talked about it, like Courtney and Nicole. One thing that I did think of was that Lemon was kind of obsessed with the perfect life, like a lot of people mentioned, and that was mentioned in the show. And Levon is not a part of that life. Obviously, it's getting married to her fiance, but that just kind of made me think of, is Levon not a part of that perfect life because he is black? Is that part of the underlying racism that she never saw herself, marrying a black man? Or is it just because he is not her fiance, George, and they've been together for so long? I guess maybe I would know more about this if I did watch the show with the whole show. This could have kind of an underlying racial problem, but there's no way to know for sure. I did connect with Courtney, though, and she mentioned in her response about being from a small town, and as well, I felt like I saw a lot of similarities between my town and what was portrayed, because, everyone knew everything about every person, and it just kind of had that same small town culture. The next thing that I talked about was Friends, the one with the male nanny. As always, I like talking about Friends because there are good and bad things about it, and it's just a lot of things to have a good discussion about. Jamie mentioned that it was clear that Rachel and others made fun of Ross for his uncomfortable reactions to Sandy, and Rachel made it clear that it was perfectly fine for a man to be a nanny and be more sensitive. Sandy was clearly the most qualified person for the job, and it was stupid that Ross had a problem just because he was a guy. I think it could have been made better by not just having Ross and Sandy discuss Ross's personal insecurities, but actually keeping Sandy on as a recurring character as the nanny and having him turn into a more complex character could be helpful, where it is this sensitive guy, but it's not just him crying and, having those typical roles. They could just make him a more complex and well-rounded character. And I also think that there were some good aspects to this. Like I mentioned, that Rachel kind of stood up, and it was clear that it almost had tones of The Office in this way, that it was clear part of the humor was how Ross was acting and how ridiculous it was that he was so, against this and so upset about it. The Office, which I will talk about next, I didn't respond to, is another one that I do like talking about, though. I really liked what Megan said about satire being used to bring attention to issues. I think this is seen more and more, and I really like it, and I think it's a good way to do it. This is seen in not only shows, but also in the news with people like John Oliver and Trevor Noah, which I think are a great way to get an audience that may not normally immerse themselves in, issues or certain things. And I think it could be a really good thing. And it's also just entertaining. And I also think that it can be taken way too far, though. And there's a thin line between it being humorous satire and just simply offensive. And it's kind of hard sometimes to navigate that. Well, I think that this episode of The Office is funny and humorous. I definitely do not think that it should be used in HR training. I think that in a workplace, it does need to be taken very seriously. And there's a place and time for humor, and there's a place and time for serious discussions. And I think in a workplace, if you're doing HR training, it's time to actually sit down and be serious about it and make sure your company knows that you don't take this as a joke. So the Riverdale responses were interesting to me because I have seen the show, but I didn't know that Jughead was asexual in the comics. I completely agree with Andrea Nicole that the producers missed out on a really great opportunity to represent an asexual character, which just isn't really shown in the media. and it would have been great to see more deep, personal, but not romantic relationships that Jughead had with other characters, because I think just too often in the media, they turn everything into a romantic relationship, which I get can appeal to the audience, but also, platonic relationships are just as important, and I think that this would have been a great way to emphasize that. And I really also like that Nicole talked about making sure that they consulted with the LGBTQ plus community and with asexual people to make sure that they were representing this right, especially since it would be one of the first representations of this community of people, in mainstream media. Thanks.